Welcome to the April 2023 update for the Marvel Snap Series 4 and 5 tier lists. Today's video is going to be breaking down where I feel all of these cards fit into the current metagame to hopefully give you an idea of which ones may or may not be worth using your valuable collector's tokens on based on both my experience playing with all of these cards as well as data that we have available to us on sites like untapped.gg. Let's get right to it, shall we? Before I dive into talking about power level, I think giving people a heads up on where these cards are going to be in terms of cost for the foreseeable future is always valuable for people using the resources correctly. So noteworthy that Kang, Galactus, and Thanos remain ideal pickups with your collector's tokens to start because they are perpetually Series 5, meaning they are not going to be cheaper than 6,000 collector tokens or easily opened in a reserve anytime soon. These other groupings of cards will be becoming cheaper in the not too distant future. We get a patch in the middle to the end of every month, so when our April patch hits, MODOK, Ghost, and Stature will be downgrading from Series 5 to Series 4, and then Black Panther, Shuri, Bast, Valkyrie, and Super Skrull will be downgrading from Series 4 to Series 3. Really big downgrades into Series 3 this month. Shuri, Bast, and Valkyrie, all fantastically powerful cards. Let's talk about why. Before we dive into the card deals, I like to break down my rating system for people that haven't watched one of these tier list videos before. The top and bottom ratings are pretty straightforward. The Shuri tier is just Shuri. She's a cut above everything else still. And kind of bad are cards that just really don't have a home and aren't great. The four categories in the middle are kind of a dual axis system where I rate not only how strong I feel the card is, but also how flexible it is. I know for a lot of people, you're looking to have fun and get variety out of the cards that you're buying. So just because something's powerful doesn't necessarily mean you can use it in a lot of different decks. So this kind of two axis system gives people a better idea of where they can expect to use these cards at a glance. Let's go ahead and get to it and talk about which cards belong where. As I mentioned a moment ago, Shuri really is a cut above everything else in Marvel Snap. And if you're looking to just play the best deck with the highest power level in our current balance patch, I think that is indisputably the Shuri deck. Putting a 26 power Red Skull into play that you either split with an Arnim Zola or copy with a Taskmaster, and you hide these giant things behind armor and Cosmos so they're difficult to interact with. Hands down, Shuri is the way to go if you're looking to just win as many games and cubes as possible. Our grouping of flexible and powerful cards here, I think, are probably the best bang for your buck if you're someone that's looking to spend your collector's tokens on cards that are quite potent but also can play inside of a variety of things. Kitty Pryde, as of the recording of this video, is actually currently disabled due to a game-breaking bug, but in the few days that we got to play with her, she just goes into so many different shells very eloquently. I think long-term, I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if Kitty Pryde kind of takes on a Sunspot-esque role and that she can kind of fit into a lot of different places because she simply lets you soak up extra energy that would otherwise be going to waste, converting it into power and flexibility on the board that also has soft combos with cards like Angela and Bishop. Darkhawk is probably one of the most flexible pile of stats in Marvel Snap right now. He's playing everything from the bounce deck that I really enjoy playing to various Sarah and Devil Dino variations. It has a number of cards that enable its stats to get larger, like Rock Slide and Black Widow and Korg, and it synergizes with actually all three of the rest of the cards in this flexible and powerful category. Zabu makes it cheaper, Bast kicks its power up to 3, and Valkyrie kicks its power up to 3 since largely its stats come from its ongoing bonus. Past helping out Darkhawk by making Darkhawk and Rock Slide cheaper, Zabu goes in a few other homes as well. There's more Mimi things that are playing like Wong and Shuri, as well as other decks that are looking to play things like Shang-Chi and Enchantress for reduced rates at the end of the game to blow the opponent out. Bast is a really unique and powerful effect that essentially is not replaceable in any of the decks that she's played in. Whether it's the bounce deck or Mr. Negative or anything else that you might be doing, such as Hitmonkey coming up in this future season pass, Bast brings a power level to the table that if you're missing her, you're just not going to be able to make up with a different card. While I rated Valkyrie kind of poorly in the last one of these tier list updates, the metagame has changed a bit since then. Most notably, Arrow was one of the best cards to make Valkyrie really bad, has been changed to no longer do that, and Leech is less prevalent since Thanos isn't the omnipresent threat in the format anymore. With Shuri rising to the top of the format, Valkyrie being a tool that can reduce the stats that Shuri puts into play while they're hiding behind Red Skull is more valuable than ever. I think basically every deck that's not Shuri in the format needs to be playing some combination of Shang-Chi, Valkyrie, and Teenage Warhead to be able to interact with the massive stats that the Shuri deck is putting out, and Valkyrie is an excellent choice for doing that and being interactive, as well as a card that you can build your deck around a little bit, leveraging ongoing cards to great effect. The narrow and powerful cards are all cards that are in really strong decks in the format, but they're basically in only one really strong deck, so if you're picking them up, you shouldn't expect to do a ton with them, at least not unless you discover something that the rest of us don't know yet. Thanos decks are still pretty good. They were nerfed in a few different ways in the most recent balance patch, but they're definitely still more than competitive. And if you're looking for a really unique playstyle, allowing you to draw a lot of cards while playing Marvel Snap, Thanos is literally the only card in the game that can provide that, and I think it's still an excellent pickup, especially when you consider the fact that it's a perpetually Series 5 card that's never going to get cheaper. Similar to Valkyrie, Teenage Warhead fills a really important role of being an interactive card that can disrupt what Shuri is doing. Teenage Warhead is really nice because she can even blow up a Red Skull that's being deployed behind a Cosmo that's otherwise typically completely non-interactable. I put Teenage Warhead inside of the narrow and powerful category because despite being a great interactive tool against Shuri, if you're not pairing her with exactly Daredevil, she can be a little cumbersome to use. Trying to line up and guess where your opponent's going to play their key card with her can be a little bit tricky without the perfect information that Daredevil can provide. Silver Surfer is one of the many things in the format that was given a little bit more breathing room when Thanos was brought down a peg. The fact that there is less leech in the format means you can play this powerful payoff on the 6th turn of the game after you've played out a bunch of 3 energy plays across the board, generating a lot of utility while you do so. Things like Killmonger, Juggernaut, and Polaris allow the Silver Surfer deck to get a lot of value even before you consider the stats that they're putting into play as well. Finally, Galactus and Null continue to be a package deal. The Galactus deck is powerful, it's obnoxious, and it loves slamming down an absolutely massive Null behind its Galactus when your opponent thinks that maybe they might have a chance. Your average Galactus is blowing away a ton of power worth of cards, and Null picks up all of those stats into a nice 6 energy package that's difficult for basically anything to compete with. You should note, even though Null is a generic destroy card, I have it in the narrow category here because there aren't really any competitive destroy decks in Marvel Snap. So outside of the Galactus deck, Null doesn't really go inside of anything that's particularly playable, in my opinion. As we move to the bottom half of our ratings here, I have a singular card in Flexible and Fine, and that is Kang the Conqueror. Kang's effect is one that can go into a lot of different decks in Marvel Snap, and what Kang does is essentially provide you with key information that when used well, I think increases the average amount of cubes you can expect to be winning per game, or reduces the amount of cubes you expect to be losing per game, just thanks to the added knowledge. That being said, the knowledge that you're getting from Kang comes at the cost of time, so I'm actually not sure if Kang is a card that meaningfully increases the number of cubes you acquire per hour, because even though your efficiency per game should be going up if you're playing with Kang well, the amount of time you're spending per game is going up as well, so I've only got him in the Flexible and Fine category instead of Powerful and Fine, because I'm not actually sure offhand if it's an efficient laddering card or not. Love to hear your opinions on that in the comments down below if you've had a chance to play with Kang. Moving into the narrow and fine category, MODOK is a card that enables some really interesting and fun discard decks. I think those discard decks are a little bit weaker than some of the other options that we talked about above, but they can be reasonably competitive in their own right, and MODOK is a unique and powerful effect, so if you want to be playing one of the discard decks that MODOK is in, he's not really going to be replaceable and definitely worth picking up to enable those decks if they tickle your fancy. Ghost is a card that I feel like I'm still fully getting my bearings on in a post-Arrow nerf world. She has some nice utility with cards like Shang-Chi and Valkyrie and Hazmat, letting you tee up turn 6s where your opponent has to play out before you, so you get to interact with their things. Ghost feels like it's a card that has a lot of potential inside of these narrow restraints, and I think she's just waiting to be figured out. Stature as a card feels like she has a lot of potential. If you can make your opponent discard a card, she becomes a 7-stat card for just 1 energy. That being said, it's hard to consistently enable her. Black Bolt as well as Moon Knight are the only 2 cards in Marvel Snap currently that forcibly make your opponent discard, and Moon Knight also makes you discard as well, which can discard key cards in your hand, including the stature you're trying to enable, making it quite awkward under most circumstances. That being said, if you can have things draw upright, she is a reasonably powerful effect, albeit under these narrow restraints. Master Mold as a card definitely ended up coming up a little bit short in the disruptive category on its own. Putting 2 Sentinels into your opponent's hand doesn't meaningfully change the game for a lot of decks, even if it does completely trip up a narrow subset of them, such as the Bounce archetype that I enjoy playing. That being said, Master Mold is a card that's good at enabling Ronin. Putting 2 more cards into your opponent's hand for 2 resources gives Ronin 4 more stats, which is pretty meaningful at the end of the game, especially if you're able to duplicate that Ronin with something like Mystique. Finally, Black Panther sees some fringe play in Mr. Negative and other combo decks looking to leverage Arnim Zola. I think the primary issue with Black Panther is that it ends up playing second fiddle to other more powerful cards like Red Skull that combo better with Shuri currently, meaning that it's really more of a niche pick than one that's widely applicable. Finally, our kind of bad cards just really don't have any homes in any reasonable deck list. Super Scroll is a tech card that feels kind of overcosted and generally worse than similar tech cards that interact with ongoing things. I think under most circumstances, I'd rather have a copy of Rogue or Enchantress than a copy of Super Scroll in my deck. Sentry is simply just too much downside for not enough upside. There are better ways to get 8 stats on your 4-drop without having to deal with a -8 card in your right path. Speaking of the right path, another problem with Sentry is simply the fact that he's restricted in the locations that he can play out to, meaning not only are you getting a bigger downside, but you're also more restricted in where your upside can take place. Under a different set of circumstances, Sauron could have a very different rating in a tier list like this. However, these tier lists need to consider the context of the game in which these cards are being played, and Sauron just isn't very good in the context of the current format. I say this because the best Sauron shell would be a Shuri Red Skull style of deck, and because Shuri is public enemy number 1, there's so many Shang-Chis and Valkyries running around that all of the best Shuri decks really want to be running Armor and Cosmo to protect their large threats, which you can't play those protective ongoing cards with Sauron that's going to be wiping away the ongoing text of all the cards in your hand and deck. Sauron is probably the only card in this kind of bad list that I think just needs a metagame shift and not a card text update, but I definitely wouldn't recommend picking up Sauron right now because he's not even optimal in his own best deck, I don't think. Shadow King is very similar to Super Skrull in that he's just worse than the other tech cards at kind of accomplishing what he does. I don't think there's a spot where you would ever want to play Shadow King when you could be playing Shang-Chi or simply paying 1 additional energy to grab a copy of Valkyrie. Dazzler and Shauna just aren't very good cards. Filling your entire board to get 10 stats on Dazzler is a difficult thing to accomplish, especially with the location variant that exists in Snap, and it's not a big payoff in proportion to the difficulty of the thing you're trying to do. Shauna is a lot of stats, but she's high variant stats, and she demands a lot of space on your board. Honestly, Dazzler, Shauna, and even Shadow King and Super Skrull and Sentry to a degree feel like these were cards that were designed with the original Zabu that made things too cheaper in mind, and it feels like all of these cards should probably be reconsidered for buffs or small redesigns, with the fact that Zabu's been made a much more fair card in its current state. Finally, Nimrod. While there's less leech in the current format than there was previously, there's more armors and cosmos than ever before, which makes any kind of remotely honest destroy deck that might want to try and play Nimrod just completely unplayable. Nimrod sees some play inside of Galactus decks, but I think the Nimrod Galactus decks on average tend to be a little bit worse than the non-Nimrod Galactus decks, but I also don't have a ton of experience with that archetype, so your mileage may vary. If you're dead set on playing Nimrod, Galactus is probably the best place you can be doing that still.